1803. Facts. William Marbury was appointed a Justice of the Peace by President Adams, but his commission was not delivered by Secretary of State Madison after Jefferson took office. Marbury sued Madison in the Supreme Court for a writ of mandamus. The court held that while Marbury had a right to his commission, it lacked the jurisdiction to issue the writ. This case established the principle of judicial review. The reasoning behind this, Chief Justice Marshall argued that the Constitution is the Supreme Court law, and laws conflicting with it are void. He found that the Judiciary Act section allowing the writ was unconstitutional. The decision was pivotal, as it marked the first time the Supreme Court invalidated a congressional law, affirming its role in checking the legislative power. This laid the foundation for future judicial review. Dissenting opinion. While there was no formal dissent, critics believed the ruling favored federal authority over states. They argued it expanded the judiciary's power, disrupting the balance among government branches. McCulloch v. Maryland, 1819. Maryland taxed the second bank of the United States, and James McCulloch, the bank's cashier, refused to pay the tax. The case addressed federal power versus state authority, holding the Supreme Court ruled that Congress had the implied power to create a national bank and that states could not tax federal institutions, affirming federal supremacy. Reasoning. Chief Justice John Marshall argued that the Constitution allows Congress to use implied powers necessary for its functions. Taxing a federal entity would undermine federal authority, violating the Supremacy Clause. Decision. The decision reinforced federal supremacy and the doctrine of implied powers, expanding congressional authority while limiting state interference. Dissenting opinion. While there was no formal dissent, some contemporaneous critics expressed concern that broad interpretations of federal power could overreach and diminish states' rights. Schenck v. United States, 1919. Charles Schenck was convicted for distributing anti-draft leaflets during World War I, violating the Espionage Act. Holding. The Supreme Court upheld Schenck's conviction, ruling that speech posing a clear and present danger to national security is not protected by First Amendment. Reasoning. Justice Holmes argued that during wartime, certain speech can significantly threaten the nation's interests, justifying limitations on free expression. Decision. The ruling established a precedent for restricting First Amendment rights in context of national security, particularly during war. Dissenting opinion. Justice Brandeis dissent, advocating for stronger protection of free speech and arguing that the best remedy for harmful speech is more speech, not suppression. Brown v. Board of Education, 1954. African American parents in Topeka, Kansas, challenged the segregation in public schools, arguing that separate schools for white and black students were not equal. Holding. The Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional, rejecting the idea of separate but equal. Reasoning. The court decided that segregated schools created feelings of inferiority among black children, which harmed their education. It stated that separate facilities are inherently unequal. Decision. The ruling required public schools to segregate, marking a major victory for the civil rights movement and pushing for equality. Dissenting opinion. There were no formal dissenting opinions, but some justices expressed concerns about how quickly desegregation would happen and its impact on society. Baker v. Carr, 1962. Charles Baker argued that Tennessee hadn't redistricted its legislative boundaries for decades, leading to unfair representation as populations changed. Holding. The Supreme Court ruled that courts could get involved in redistricting cases, meaning they could decide whether districts were fairly drawn. Reasoning. The court said that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment requires districts to have roughly equal populations so that every vote has equal weight. Decision. This ruling allowed federal courts to handle cases about how states draw their legislative districts, pushing for fairer representation with the idea of one person, one vote. Dissenting opinion. Justice Frankfurter disagreed, believing that redistricting should be a political issue for states to handle, not something for the federal courts to intervene in. Angel versus Vittel, 1962. A group of New York parents led by Stephen Angel challenged a state law that encouraged a short voluntary prayer at the start of each school day, arguing it violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The Supreme Court ruled that the school-sponsored prayer was unconstitutional, even though it was voluntary and non-denominational. Reasoning. The court reasoned that the government should not be involved in promoting religious activities, as it could lead to government endorsement of religion, which the Establishment Clause was designed to prevent. Decision. This decision emphasized the separation of church and state, reinforcing that public schools cannot sponsor religious practices, even if participation is optional. Dissenting opinion. Justice Potter Stewart dissent, arguing that the prayer was non-denominational and voluntary, suggesting it did not represent a government endorsement of religion and should be permissible. Gideon versus Wayne Wright, 1963. Facts. Clarence Earl Gideon was charged with a felony in Florida. He could not afford an attorney and requested that the court appoint one for him, but his request was denied based on state law. He represented himself at trial and was convicted. Holding. The Supreme Court held that the Sixth Amendment guarantees the right to counsel for all defendants in criminal cases, regardless of their ability to pay. Reasoning. The court reasoned that the right to a fair trial is fundamental, and having an attorney is essential for ensuring a fair defense. This ruling applied the right to counsel to state courts through the 14th Amendment. Decision. This decision required the states to provide free legal counsel to defendants who cannot afford an attorney, significantly expanding the rights for individuals in the criminal justice system. Dissenting opinion. There was no formal dissenting opinions in this case, as the ruling was anonymous. However, some justices expressed concerns about the financial implications for states in providing legal counsel for all defendants.
Tinker versus Des Moines, 1969. Facts. Students wore black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. The school suspended them for doing so. Holding. The Supreme Court said students have the right to free speech at school. Reasoning. The court decided that wearing armbands was peaceful and didn't disrupt school, so it was protected by the First Amendment. Decision. 7 out of 2 in favor of the students. Dissenting opinion. Justice Black and Stewart disagreed, saying schools should be able to stop actions that might disrupt learning. New York Times versus U.S. 1969. Facts. The U.S. government tried to stop the New York Times from publishing secret documents about the Vietnam War. Holding. The Supreme Court ruled that the government couldn't stop the newspaper from publishing. Reasoning. The court said freedom of press was more important than keeping the documents secret. Decision. 6 out of 3 in favor of the newspaper. Dissenting opinion. Some justices felt the government should be able to stop the publication to protect national security. Wisconsin versus Yoder, 1972. Facts. Amish parents were fined for not sending their kids to school after 8th grade because they went against their religious beliefs. Holding. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Amish parents. Reasoning. The court said the law violated the Amish parents' religious rights. Decision. 7 out of 0 in favor of the Amish parents. Dissenting opinion. There were no dissenting opinions. All justices agreed with the decision. Versus Breno, 1993. Facts. North Carolina created a weirdly shaped district to help elect more African American representatives. Some people argued it was drawn to separate voters based on race. holding the Supreme Court ruled that the district was unconstitutional. Reasoning: the court ruled that the making vote districts based on race can violate equal protections under the 14th Amendment. Decision: 5 out of 4 in favor of Shaw. Dissenting opinion: justices disagreed, arguing that the creating a district for racial fairness was okay under the Constitution. U.S. versus Lopez, 1995. Facts: Lopez, a student, brought a gun to school. He was charged under a law that banned guns in school zones, but he said that the law was not allowed by the Constitution. Holding: the Supreme Court agreed with Lopez and said the law was unconstitutional. Reasoning: the court said that the law didn't relate to businesses or trade, so Congress couldn't pass it. Decision: 5 out of 4 in favor of Lopez. Dissenting opinion: some justices disagreed, saying that the law was needed to keep students safe and couldn't be linked to commerce. McDonald versus Chicago, 2010. Fact: Chicago banned handguns. McDonald argued this violated his right to own a gun. Holding: the court ruled the Second Amendment applies to all states and cities. Reasoning: the right to own a gun is a basic right that must be protected everywhere. Decision: 5 out of 4 in favor of McDonald. Dissenting opinion: some justices believed cities should have the power to make their own laws about guns. Citizens United versus FEC, 2010. Facts: Citizens United wanted to make a movie criticizing politicians, but campaign laws said corporations couldn't spend money on ads. Holding: the court ruled the corporation can spend unlimited money on political ads. Reasoning: the court said spending money on political speech is protected by the First Amendment. Decision: 5 out of 4 in favor of the Citizens United. Dissenting opinion: some justices worried that allowing big spending would hurt democracy.
Make sure to drop a like and subscribe, and make sure to comment. Don't forget to hit that notification, and have a good day. Thank you.